Noble Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. Ambassador Prabhat Shukla is with me after a lot of time, actually. I last spoke to Prabhat Shukla, I think, a few months ago when we were discussing what's going to really unfold in Ukraine and, of course, about China and a bunch of other things. Lots, in fact, has unfolded, should I say, in all of these domains. And it's a rare opportunity once again to get Prabhat Shukla to comment on all of these things. Ambassador, welcome.
Hi, Hindol. Always good to be with you. And sure, looking forward to a thorough discussion, thorough airing of views. As you say, a lot has happened, and the new Trump administration is really turning things around. So, yes, indeed, there's a lot to discuss.
So let me begin by talking a little bit about what's going on first in Russia, because that's, of course, a lot, in fact, has unfolded on that just in the last few days after that infamous meeting between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office. Talk to me a little bit about where you see the war there unfold. I mean, we were saying last time you and I were talking about this that clearly Russia has got what it really wanted. It's got Crimea. It's never going to give it up. Trump has now said that Ukraine is never going to join NATO. That's another big win for Russia. And of course, the Donbass, again, increasingly, it's very, very unclear that Ukraine will ever get the kind of armaments that it would require to really take back the Donbass. That doesn't seem likely. How do you see this pan out from a Russian perspective here on?
Right. Okay. It's a very big story. Uh, just thinking where to begin. Um, yeah. See, yes, you're right. Crimea was the real objective. They've got it. They got it in 2014. What they did not have was a land bridge to Crimea. They had built a bridge over the Kerch Strait, but that was vulnerable to bombings, and it was bombed, in fact. So they were looking for a land bridge, which they now have through the Donbass. And you're absolutely right. I don't see that they will part with it. Um, Now, some very interesting things have happened around this whole question of Russia and Russia in Eurasia. The Chinese have this one belt, one road, right? And the road is that old Silk Road, which is a bit of a fiction, but that's the road which they want to trade overland with Europe. And Europe has always been a very major trading partner. I think today it is their number 2 trading partner, behind, I think, ASEAN. So now a couple of very interesting things happened. The sea routes have every commercial advantage over the land routes, the railway lines. They are cheaper, they're not much slower, and one shipload can carry 10 times what a rail cargo freight can carry. So every which way, the sea routes were advantageous from a purely commercial point of view. But just as the situation was evolving, we have the Houthis disrupting shipping in the Red Sea area between the Bab el Mandab and the Suez Canal. Now, very revealingly, a Chinese scholar wrote I think 2 months back, that the Houthis are doing China a favor by blocking the sea routes. And indeed, that was the case. Now, what has happened is, of late, starting from November last year, Russia has been disrupting the rail route. Now, the date is not a coincidence. It coincides with the election of Donald Trump. So it's been my view for a while that the kind of trade-offs that we are looking at are actually largely subterranean. For example, what the Russians are doing is something that very few have picked up on. And yet, what has happened is, if I remember correctly, there has been a pretty sharp decline in the last 3 months since the Russians began disrupting it. The reason given by the Russians is that they are blocking what they call dual use items, which might go to Europe and which might then find their way into Ukraine for them to use in the war against them. Now, the difficulty with this point of view is that it's almost 3 years now. In fact, it's more than 3 years since the war happened. And for the best part of 2 years and a half, they did not see fit to do this. So, the timing itself, I think, is quite revealing. So today you have a situation, and by the way, this is also the historical pattern. All these trade routes are viable in a purely economic sense until they are disrupted by either war or pestilence, like the Black Death of the 17th century, 17th century, and so on. So what we are seeing today is a very, let me put it this way, the fact that the rail routes are being subjected to some disruption would be very welcome news for the Anglo-Saxons, because this is actually their nightmare. You can take it back to Mackinder's seminal essay in 1904, and they have always been talking about how if Eurasia were to be unified under any one country's leadership, that would be very hurtful to, in those days he wrote about British interests, but I think you can widen the scope and say it would be hurtful to the Anglo-American or the Anglo-Saxon interests. Now, that is probably why we saw such an aggressively pro-Russian stance by President Trump. And I think he made it pretty clear, it was out there in everyone's view, the way they clashed and the way immediately after that, the Americans withheld both arms and intelligence. Now, arms you can stock up, you may pull along for a week or two, but without intelligence, you cannot last a day. So that explains the climb down by the Ukrainians in their meeting in Jeddah with the American team. Now, there's an interesting nuance there, because after the meeting, Secretary of State Rubio has said very publicly that the ball is now in Russia's court, and they have now to show that they are also interested in a peaceful settlement, and that their objective, that is America's objective, is to develop an agreement which will ensure the long-term security of Ukraine without defining what that will consist of, whether territorial integrity is an issue or not, because they have carefully never used that term for Ukraine. And you saw a couple of days ago, Trump threatened Russia with sanctions if they don't agree to the terms that are now on offer to them. Now, I was watching Russia TV today just to understand how the Russians are likely to react to this new development in Jeddah. And the commentators there were largely negative, in fact, pretty strongly negative about the ceasefire proposal, because they say that in the past, whenever we've had these kind of ceasefires, they have only been used in order to allow Ukraine time to arm itself and get ready for another round of fighting. And we are not going to let that happen again. So this seems, and most of these media outlets do take their cues from the government of Russia. So I would imagine that the Russians themselves would have some difficulty in accepting this in toto. They would have to add some riders to it. What those riders will be, we can only surmise, and perhaps very soon it'll become clear, because I think the Russians are expected to give a reply pretty soon. But I imagine it would be some sort of understanding that this time will not be used to arm Ukraine, because the French and the former French and German leaders have gone public and said that when they did the Minsk agreements, it was in their minds that they would buy some time to allow Ukraine to prepare for further fighting. So I don't think that the Russians are now wise to that, and some sort of agreement will have to be reached to address this particular concern. So that brings us up to date, and now let us see how the Russians react.
I want to talk a little bit about something that you mentioned in terms of disruption of trade routes. There has been this conversation that, in a sense, there could be, and of course, this is one of India's, soto voce concerns too, greater cooperation between Russia and China. Now, which you also, in a sense, alluded to with when you spoke about the disruption of trade routes or sea routes on one side and land routes on the other. Do you see that coming to pass, or do you think that's still fairly nascent, and we don't know what's going to happen there?
You mean Russia-China relations?
That's right.
Or you
Yes.
mean the trade route, the contest between the trade routes?
The contest
Or
between the
both?
trade routes is perhaps inevitable,
Yes.
Ambassador.
Yeah.
But the Russia-China deeper
Okay.
collaboration,
Okay.
cooperation, whatever
Okay.
you want to call it,
Okay.
to many people, Ambassador, may I also say that this seems not like not like collaboration between equals at all. In fact, this really seems like Russia, sort of, in a sense, weaker state coming under the broader vassalage, should I say, of the rising Chinese great power state, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, look, I think the okay. Let's put it this way. When the Americans today, that is the new Trump's administration, their commentators and those commentators who are in tune with their thinking have made no secret of the fact that the aim of involving Russia and giving it the freedom to join on respectable terms, that one of the major objectives is to drive a wedge between Russia and China. And you can stand that on its head and be totally correct in saying that the Biden strategy was to drive Russia into China's arms. So this is one of those situations where you actually see a straight 180-degree turnaround. One lot saying, push them into China's arms. And by the way, the Biden team was beginning to do the same with India also. This whipping up this Khalistan problem. And, fine, they lecture us about free speech, which they don't practice. But even if you're talking free speech, that does not include threatening people, threatening our diplomats, attacking our diplomatic missions and consular missions. So they were very clearly aware of what they were doing in terms of provoking India, and you saw the result. There was an agreement on the border between India and China, and the first summit since 2019 between our Prime Minister and President Xi. So
Sir,
my
if I may
sense,
just
sure,
quickly
sure,
slip in one question here. To some people, this seems like a bit of a curious strategy because, in some senses, perhaps there could be some, as it were, momentary sort of settlements or peace in some areas. But in a broader scope, how does America gain by pushing Russia and also China, or also India, into the ambit of China?
Okay. Now let me just see. Do I want to complete the first thought, or do I'll address this right now. If you go back to look on the democratic side, the fount of all strategic thinking still is Zbigniew Brzezinski. And back in 1997, he wrote an article very clearly hinting at the importance of giving China a major role in the Eastern Hemisphere on a kind of G2 basis. Now, you could argue that this is playing with fire because China will not be satisfied with just half the world. But this is what the Americans were thinking of. You saw it very clearly under Obama. The Biden lot managed to make it a little fuzzy, but shorn of all the fuzziness, this is what they were also planning to do, a G2 with China. And you saw, the fact is that today in America, public opinion and congressional opinion is by and large quite negative on China. So they had to be more circumspect, the Biden regime. And they did it pretty adroitly. And that is how I understood what they were trying to do, which is to say, there's no use confronting China. And the best thing is we divide up the world on a G2 basis, which means that, we have to push Russia into their arms. And India, well, we'll see how it evolves. But they were certainly driving a wedge between themselves and India. As I mentioned, the whole Khalistan thing. This was this is a very, very serious challenge to India's national sovereignty. And this is not the kind of thing that an alleged strategic partner would do to us. And now to come back to the main point which you made, I agree with you. Russia was not comfortable playing second fiddle to China. And what's more, I think very large elements in Russia do fear China's long-term ambitions. Because when you read some of their online commentators, they lay claim to Vladivostok and many other parts of Siberia. And of course, there is a terrible population mismatch. So it's not something that the Russians are unaware of. And therefore, they have never been very comfortable playing second fiddle to the People's Republic. And you can see it now immediately. He gets an opening and President Putin moves in decisively. Now, how does it move forward? We have to watch, because it's worth remembering when we are talking about Secretary of State Rubio. As a senator, he was one of the harshest critics of Russia. So how much has he actually changed? We still have to see. If you saw the confirmation hearings of President Trump's first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who was an oil man, the kind of questioning which Senator Rubio did was very hostile to Russia. So, putting all this together, you have to understand that the dynamic is still very fluid, but the benefits are enormous if they can pull it off, which is what Donald Trump is trying to do. Because take away Russia, and who are China's partners and friends? Pakistan, Cambodia, maybe North Korea. It's not much of a team. So therefore, I think it is a master stroke if it can be pulled off. And that is what we have to see unveiling itself over the coming weeks and months.
I have two questions on this, Ambassador, if I may. Until recently, it seems to me, even a few years ago, one of the lines of thought about the India US relationship was that there has been in the Beltway certain constituencies who were always worried that, especially Prime Minister Modi, being a real pragmatist, will in fact, figure out a way to crack a deal with China and settle the border question, and which means one of India's major strategic, thorns in a sense in its flesh would be sorted, and the Americans would like to keep dangling and hanging and keep poking it so that India remains vulnerable there, and of course Pakistan wants the same, and so on and so forth. Now, this was one assessment. Obviously, what you're saying moves away from this assessment to a very different, dimension, so to speak. I want to take off from where what you mentioned, on playing with fire. There are two concerns here, Ambassador. One, can you really divide this up? I mean, this to some people, this might seem like that moment after the Second World War again, where you're carving out zones of influence in a sense, saying that, well, you take care of this bit and this bit is mine. And as long as you don't, do bad things, so to speak, in my domain, I will let you be. This hasn't worked in the past, and it's very, very unclear whether it would work with countries like India and Russia today, because at the very least, those countries may not want the sort of overarching, dominance, or to come under China's umbrella in the first place.
No, 100% right. And I just mentioned it too, that Russia and India are not going to be subservient in any way or play second fiddle in any way to the People's Republic. No. Now, of course, this notion of spheres of influence is not new. It is actually quite old. And you can take it back to the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. Since then, there has been this drive among the Europeans of all stripes, including Russia, to divide up, carve up, draw lines on maps, regardless of how it affects the people. I mean, the most recent, well, not most recent, but one of the recent ones in the 20th century was how Russia and Britain divided up Tibet, Afghanistan, and Iran between themselves. So this notion is there. It's ingrained in them, a sense of power politics, and in terms of entitlement more than anything else. But and you're absolutely right. It tends to break down, and that's what I said. That when they're trying to play a G2 with China, it's a highly risky strategy, because everything that we can judge about the People's Republic is that they are not going to be happy with one half of the world. They want the whole of it. And anybody who is unwise enough to disarm and to think that you can appease them is making a mistake. No, you can't appease these kind of systems. The Chinese people are quite all right, but the communist system is inherently expansionist, because they know deep down they are illegitimate. Given half a chance, the people of the People's Republic will disown them and throw them into the dustbin of history.
The big question, of course, that immediately springs to mind at this analysis, Ambassador, is what happens to the Indo-Pacific, right? I mean, only a few years ago, we were talking about this great pivot to the Indo-Pacific and countering China in the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese, of course, don't like the phrase Indo-Pacific. They prefer Asia-Pacific. But
Yes.
this whole action that was brewing, including the creation of the Quad, the AUKUS, and all kinds of things, You're essentially saying that there is something more happening at a subterranean level, even though all of this is playing out at a more visible, stratum, so to speak.
Hmm. Yes, I am saying that, and I'll try and elucidate. Um, in fact, again, this is one of those arguments which the sympathetic commentators to President Trump also make this point that his approach, his ruthless approach towards the Ukraine war and towards Gaza, both, is in order to free up American resources to focus on the Indo-Pacific, because they all understand that that is where the real trouble is going to come from. Now, you can sense, even in President Trump's own words, that he does see China sorry, as a long-term threat, because while he says he's very fond of Xi Jinping, which, by the way, is quite understandable, as we have discussed, I believe left to himself, Xi Jinping would also settle the border issue with India. It's the PLA that's not letting him do it. So for President Trump to say that he likes Xi Jinping, again, to my mind, reflects exactly this kind of input, that the force that you have to isolate is the PLA, or at least large segments of it, because it's not a monolith. So I think in the process, you can see that he is, for instance, when he talks about the Panama Canal, what does he say? Why is China controlling both ends of the canal? Is not why is a foreign power controlling it? Why is China controlling it? So all through you see in his mind, it's China that is the real danger to America. Even when he's talking about the tariffs, which are, as he said, his favorite word after God and father and mother and all that. So he says, so there also it's the same story. So why Mexico? Why Canada? Because China is producing stuff there and then pushing it into America. So if at all they're going to work this around, I think they're going to end up raising the rules of origin. The percentage of local content, they will push it up much higher, so that it's not that easy for some third country to come in and exploit the free trade agreement. Now, the crucial question here is Taiwan. And I am struck by the fact that President Trump has said very little about Taiwan and practically nothing after becoming president. Now, before as a candidate, he said, they are 100 miles away, we are 5,000 miles away. And that was a somewhat discouraging message for Taipei. And also, it's something, the dog that didn't bark. This time, the Taiwanese president did not make a phone call to congratulate him, like happened in 2017. Now, I can't believe it's because they did not try. I would surmise that the Americans told them, no, don't, it's not going to be possible this time, or not at this time anyway. That's my reading of the situation. But it is purely speculative. But I can't believe that the Taiwanese would not have tried. So I think, I guess that he is waiting for a face-to-face meeting with President Xi before he determines what his stand is going to be on Taiwan. But I think the geographic compulsions, the first island chain, that's a very strong motive. And I think the consensus within America itself on Taiwan the Taiwan Relations Act and the six assurances, all of this does suggest that Taiwan is not about to be left twisting in the wind. No, I don't see that happening. That said, I think there is this question of Quad, as you mentioned. But now you see on day one, the foreign ministers of the Quad countries had a meeting in Washington. So I think there was a very powerful message there. And we are talking about a summit later this year. So I think as far as the Quad is concerned, it is moving forward. The thing we have to watch for, you see, what the Biden regime had done was they moved Quad from a security, it's called the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, from a security outlook to a kind of, economic mishmash. So, there was emerging technologies, there was climate change, there were all sorts of things bunked into the same thing. And then a little bit about the security. That's not what the Quad was intended to be. Now, will the new lot, will they revive the original focus? And if so, will it be at the summit? And again, I think it's all being very carefully choreographed in Washington so that he will have a summit with both President Putin and President Xi, and then come to India for the summit. And as we know now, of course, Vice President Vance is coming to India pretty soon, and the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, also. I believe they're coming together. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I'm hearing. So whichever way it is, I think that will be a precursor and a pretty good indicator of how this relationship will evolve.
Tell me, if you were to zoom out a little bit, what do you believe is America's instincts under Trump? And I also want to talk about a post-Trump scenario because at the end of the day, Trump is only 4 years. America's strategic interests are, in a sense, eternal, as it were. What do you think are the instincts with Trump? I mean, because there seems to be two different things. One is this, inevitability of confronting China. That's one, but there is also, as you pointed out, this entire G2 vision, which in a sense is also appeasing China. But this is contradictory at the very heart of it.
Oh, yes.
And how do you think this which side, should I say, outweighs the other at this juncture?
I would say that at this point of time, it is a toss up. Um, I think the kind of political victory that President Trump won in November last year, the clean sweep, White House, Senate, Congress, House, has given him the upper hand and the legitimacy to enforce his vision. And I think the frenetic activity that they have undertaken since the 20th of January has left the globalist opposition reeling. And it'll take them a little while, but gradually you can see that they are also bringing their act together. Initially, it seems to be coming from the judiciary. They are pretty much all the way up to the Supreme Court, which was a bit of a surprise. They have blocked they have overturned his blocking of spending USAID money for certain purposes. And that had been blocked by a judge to begin with, a district judge. And then they fought it all the way up to the Supreme Court, which has upheld the original judgment rather than the administration's plaint, which raises in my mind a question, just how does this work and how long can this situation last? That, a district judge can overturn a decision by the President of the United States. We are all taught to believe that the President of the United States is the most powerful man in the world. And yet, some anonymous judge sitting in some jurisdiction who is overturning it merrily. So, leaving that aside, that's a constitutional issue for the Americans to sort out. The point is that the resistance, as it was called last time round, is not dead, and they are gathering the gathering steam. And I think by the by, it'll become more and more apparent. The media will come forward. At the moment, the media are also reeling, and you see the number of sackings that have been from the old woke uh, crowd of journalists. But that doesn't mean the fight is over. There's still a lot of fighting to be done. The question is really, this is how in a democracy you shift the center, like Reagan did or like Margaret Thatcher did. And then in America, at least, that center was shifted right back, well to the left under Obama. And there it had remained to the extent that they actually undermined President Trump's first term. A sitting president was stymied by this consensus on the woke left, the globalist woke left. Now, I think they are now gearing up for the elections in 2026, and their hope seems to be focused on the House. Uh, the majority of the Republicans is razor thin. So they are hoping that they can overturn that majority. And then, of course, they're back in the game. However, if the Republicans improve their tally in the House while retaining the Senate, then you can say that the center of gravity is shifting in the direction of the nationalist forces. Because really, it's a clash. Since you said zoom out, it's really a clash between the woke globalist left and the nationalist right. Trump, of course, calls it common sense, which is winning, and that's not wrong. I have myself used the term sanity because it's insanity when you're putting tampons in men's bathrooms. What on earth is all that about? So you're returning to a certain kind of sanity, but the globalists are not down. They're down, but they're not out. And so I think this is going to play out, I guess, over at least one more election cycle. If in 2028 the nationalist forces win again in the same way, all three estates, then I think you will see the center begin to shift, like we saw it in America under Clinton. He shifted the center, and like Tony Blair did in the UK, he shifted the Democrats to a much more pragmatic position. So that is how, in a democracy, these processes happen. Let's see what happens. We have time, and of course, a lot of it is going to depend on the kind of governance that the nationalists are now able to provide. They must fulfill all the promises that they have made. So, things like prices and deficits, debt. The debt is now something like $37 trillion. So, all that they have to deliver on, plus secure borders and controlling the mass pell-mell immigration that was going on, and good sense, like no trans men in women's sports and so on. If all that they can deliver, then I think you could say that they have succeeded.
Let's come to China now, because we've now discussed the United States, we've discussed Russia, we've of course discussed the Indo-Pacific, and the remaining part, of course, really which is crying out to be discussed is, of course, China. and how China sees all of this. From China's vantage point, do you think they feel that this war, that in a sense Russia seems to have won, how do they see it, do you think?
Well, I think the People's Republic has supported Russia, but with a twist, because all through they have said that they stand for the territorial integrity of states, which is obviously something which the Russians cannot and will not provide for Ukraine. So while they have supported Russia, I would say even militarily to some extent, um, that support has not been as wholehearted as Russia would want. That is the, if you like, the backdrop. And you remember they also tried their hand at a peace initiative, which got nowhere because it began with these premises, that territorial integrity is a basic requirement. So it was dead on arrival in Moscow at any rate. Now, now that Trump has taken the lead, the Chinese appear to be a little concerned. They are concerned on two counts. The first count is that the wooing of Russia is proceeding successfully. It was extraordinary. And that's why I asked you if you've been getting my emails, because I have circulated that. I'll dig it out and send it to you if I've overlooked you, which is not like me at all. So there was an
Might
article
be
in
some technical error, sir. Please do send it to
must
me.
be, yeah. Great, great. Let's blame the computer. Always. They can't fight back anyway. No, but uh, it was extraordinary. There was an article in the South China Morning Post, I think about a week ago. There's this commentator, I think he's half Canadian, half Chinese, or something like that, named Alex Lowe, Lo. It was an extraordinary attack on Russia and on Putin by name. And the subtitle was that this will now allow Russia to play a free hand against China. So clearly they are worried about the newfound bonhomie between the Russians and the Americans, or to be more precise, between the two presidents. So that is one level at which they are concerned. Um, I think the second is, of course, this that in the process of this wedge being driven, they are totally isolated. As I mentioned earlier, take away Russia, and what's China left with? With partners whom you'd rather not have. I mean, look at Pakistan, look what's happening in Balochistan. And Balochistan hits the Chinese directly because they have invested a lot under the CPEC in that area. So I think this is what the Chinese, these are the two worries that the Chinese have. And you can see that also in the way they are responding to President Trump's initiative. They have said it must involve all the stakeholders, and occasionally that Europe must be involved. In other words, what they're saying is that this nice, the two presidents making nice with each other is not acceptable to them. When they say that this must involve all the stakeholders, they obviously include themselves as well, and they are being left out completely. So this is where the Chinese are coming from. I think they are concerned about the direction of events, and the fact that the Americans have also talked directly to the Ukrainians, again without the Europeans being present, would be giving them extra unease right now.
It's an interesting juncture for China, Ambassador, if I may say so, because you mentioned Balochistan, which I was going to get into. as China gets more and more aggressive in the Indo-Pacific, with Southeast Asian countries, with Taiwan, there are other things that are not quite working in the way China may have wanted them to work. One, of course, is what happened in the Russian war, which you just explained, the Ukrainian war. The other, of course, is Balochistan, which you alluded to, and I want to go into it with a little more depth. What happened in Balochistan yesterday was really, in a sense, epoch making, where the Baloch Liberation Army managed to essentially take an entire train with 100, 200, I don't know how many hundreds of Pakistani soldiers, and managed to bifurcate civilians and send them back and hold on to the soldiers. Now, from what I hear, even as we speak, this matter is not resolved.
Yeah.
And many are beginning to say that, in fact, in large swaths of Balochistan, which has always been true, but perhaps is more true today than ever before, essentially Pakistan has no writ. Some of this writ, which never existed in the first place, seem to be coming back when, as you said, the CPEC started getting built. You know, this big airport, the Gwadar airport got built. I mean, it must be the only major airport in the world where nothing ever lands and nothing really takes off. But and now, of course, the Chinese have put in millions of dollars into this. And now this entire area, I mean, the Americans got excited in between, saying there's a lot of minerals in Balochistan. And, I remember Newsweek and Time began to write in classic style how many billions of dollars of minerals are going to come out of Gwadar via, the digging of areas in Balochistan. And yet, with all of this tamasha, should I say, this whole pantomime that got created, in fact, today Balochistan is almost, many would say, very close to becoming independent. In your assessment, what's going on? And this is a big blow to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, isn't it?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. See, they themselves say that the CPEC is the flagship project in the One Belt, One Road. So, and I think in terms of money, it's way ahead of whatever else they may have put in anywhere else. So, yes, this is a very big blow. And like you said, I mean, hijacking a whole train, I mean, who's ever heard of that? A plane, yes, a train, good God. So let's see how it ends. But from what I'm hearing, the Baluch, the BLA, are using fairly sophisticated weapons, including shoulder-launched missiles, to attack Pakistan Air Force helicopters. So they are obviously well prepared and well provisioned, and are now ready to take the next step. Uh, a major development on the way has been the unification of all the Baloch separatist groups. This took place sometime about a week or 10 days ago. So that, one of the besetting weaknesses of the Baloch movement so far has been their internal divisions. So if they have overcome that, it's a very big development. And yeah, you're right. The Pakistani writ doesn't really run, and the PRC is paranoid about terrorists, as they call them, freedom fighters, attacking their assets and their citizens. In fact, the death of Chinese citizens has been a running sore in the relationship between Pakistan and the People's Republic. So, put all this together, yes, it is very grim times for both Pakistan and the People's Republic. I think again, zooming out a little bit, we also have to see how the relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan are developing, going in, actual shooting wars taking place, or shooting skirmishes taking place at different points of the disputed Durand line.
So the strange thing, I mean, Pakistan always strategically talked about creating a scenario where India will fight a two-front war. But in fact, today it has come to pass that it is Pakistan which is really fighting a two-front war.
Yeah. In fact, you could even say three, because relations with Iran are equally tense. And they have exchanged fire, they have exchanged aerial attacks. So, all around there is a problem. Now, the only thing to be said about, well, the only additional thing to be said about Balochistan is that they have a problem similar to that of the Kurds, that they are spread over so many different sovereignties that it's very hard to get all of them to accept independence. Now, I could, if I were sitting in Kabul, which thank God I'm not, uh, I could see the benefit of detaching Balochistan. I get access to the sea. But there is the question, what happens to Iran? They have a Balochistan province as well, and that is also restive right now. And from what I understand, the Baloch believe that both the parts have to belong to them together. Now that, unless they can co-opt the Pashtuns as well, that otherwise it will be very difficult, because they just don't have the numbers. The total number of Baloch is about 20 million or so on the Pakistani side, and even fewer on the Iranian side. So it is a bit of a hill that they have to climb, but I think they have the determination. We've seen that since 1948. And historically, they were not part of British India. They had their own standalone treaty with London. So, in that sense, in fact, this is something which even Jinnah, who was their lawyer for a brief while before he turned on them, had conceded that their stance was that of a sovereign state, quite independent of the rest of British India. So, both legally, socially, and now I dare say militarily, the case for Balochistan is very strong.
Ambassador, that leaves us with another rather confounding problem, to which answers seem to be scarce. If indeed Balochistan breaks away from Pakistan, this would be the second dismemberment, as it were, of Pakistan since its birth, as it were, after 1947. Bangladesh, of course, being the first one. uh, this nuclear armed Pakistan. Pakistan wasn't nuclear armed when Bangladesh broke away, but a nuclear armed Pakistan losing one more vast chunk. Balochistan is not a small province. It's I believe a huge. Maybe I don't offhand remember how what percentage of territory it is of Pakistan, but maybe a third, maybe even more
40,
than that.
40%.
40%. There you are. So how will Pakistan respond to this kind of dismemberment? And do you think that will cause, in a sense, a nuclear crisis of a magnitude that perhaps nobody really is thinking through at the moment?
No, no. In fact, this is a question that crops up frequently when one talks about either Balochistan or Pashtunistan, or even Sindh. I mean, one mustn't forget Sindh. It crops up frequently. See, I mean, which was the country that had the biggest stockpile? The USSR. It broke up. What happened? Nothing happened. So, if, for example, as the Soviet Union was cracking open, where would they use their nuclear weapons? Would they attack the Ukrainians? Would they attack the Belarusians? Would they attack the Latvians, the Uzbeks? Whom? So, and would that help? All that would happen is that they would become even more alienated. So, when this kind of national liberation kind of thing begins, it's not easy to bomb them into submission, especially not with nuclear weapons. That's number one. And number two, look, and not divulging anything special, I think. But the concerned people have, I think, a fair idea of where their nuclear weapons are and how many of them there are. And they are, like was done with Ukraine. Ukraine was cajoled, pushed, whatever you want to say, into submitting all their nuclear weapons. That kind of thing can be worked out. So what I'm trying to say is that because they have nuclear weapons, it does not give them the right, nor does it behoove us to accept such a right to deny self-determination to people who have been struggling for it for 75 years. So I would be cautious about that. Look, there are other aspects. I think the most serious point here will be the flow of refugees. There'll be refugees traveling in all directions, including ours.
Exactly the way it
And
was in Bangladesh.
yes, even worse probably this time. But yes, there will be a lot. And I think that is really what we need to prepare for. And there are ways of doing it. It's not that it can't be done.
Other question, Ambassador, of course, is and I'm really glad you mentioned Pashtunistan and you also brought in Sindh. Of course, all of us know that all of these areas are extremely restive, including Sindh.
Yes,
If genuinely in the next decade, one by one, these break away, what is to be, I mean, what is left of the country called Pakistan? It is, I mean, Jinnah himself called it moth eaten, when he received it. But what will be left is basically a rump of Punjab, essentially,
that's
governed
right.
by Punjabis.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's exactly what will happen. And I think that is a sizable population. I think the population of Pakistan, Punjab, is of the order of 100 million. I may be off by 10, 20 million. I mean, I
From
might be
The population of Pakistan, you're saying?
of Punjab in
Oh,
Pakistan.
yeah, about 100 million. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about
Total is about
100 million.
180 to 200 million.
That's right.
Punjab
Yeah,
itself would be about 100 million. That's
would
right.
be
Yes.
about 50% or a little over.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's a sizable population.
That's right.
And I think if they learn any lessons, they learn to come to terms with their neighbors, and then you can really think in terms of a different set of relationships, because there will then be Pashtunistan. I don't know how viable
Yeah.
Pakistani Pashtunistan alone would be,
Correct.
and so there are going to be a lot of issues to settle. There's no question about it, but again and again I say, as happened with the Soviet Union, that was no reason to deny the Ukrainians, the Uzbeks, the Kazakhs, the Latvians, the Estonians their right to self determination.
Great.
At some stage, I think the notion of self determination must trump these kind of considerations. Speaking of Trump, by the way, President Trump is not in favor of the dismemberment of states. So if you cast your mind back, in 2017, the Kurds in Iraq were all set to hold a referendum,
Right.
and it was Trump who sort of killed it. They did go ahead with it, but then they changed its character, and it became non-binding and that kind of stuff. But that was his doing, because otherwise there was a real head of steam building up under the Kurdish national movement. But so well, anyway, time marches on. Let's see how it all pans out.
So there's also, since we're talking about Pakistan, we cannot not talk about what's happening in Bangladesh, where, in fact, Ambassador, the tune has changed, it seems, ever since Trump has come to power. I noticed with care the recent interview given by Mohammed Yunus, the so-called interim head of this caretaker government, and he seems to be speaking a very different language and idiom now.
I was struck by that myself. And has a leopard changed its spots? I doubt it very much. I don't look. I think with Bangladesh, um, frankly, I think we have misjudged the dynamic within that country. So somehow we believe that the Mujib and his daughter were well disposed towards us, and the others were hostile or somewhat neutral. I think that I think that was a mistake. Because let's say the creeping genocide of Hindus has gone on unabated, regardless of who was in power in Dhaka. And I believe that we ought to have been tougher. I have always been tougher whenever I've had dealings with the Bangladeshis, which has been rather limited actually in my career and post career. But whenever I do bring this up and I say, how long is this supposed to go on? Are you out to wipe them out completely? Because from 30% you're down to 8%. And this has gone on, as I said, uh, relentlessly right from 1940, in fact, even before 1947. Direct Action Day, in fact, was
Right.
1946. So, this is something which we have we have played we've played this strategy wrong. And I regret to say we are still, I think,
Getting it
not playing
wrong.
it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
like
it,
if
it
they,
struck me, Ambassador, that, I mean, I watched with complete amazement how Germany's foreign minister zoomed in to shake hands and validate the ISIS Al Qaeda connected new leader of Syria just because he had worn now a suit and had started giving interviews to the BBC and so on and so forth. And literally within weeks a large minority has been slaughtered, including women and children in Syria, as by the way everybody including Tulsi Gabbard always predicted that this is
absolutely,
exactly what's going to happen. Now,
absolutely,
and it immediately occurred to me that this is the formula that some parts of the West seem to like. You see, once you wipe out the minority, like it has been done to the Hindus in Pakistan, there is no minority problem.
no
India has
minority.
minority problem because it has a growing minority population.
That's right. That's right. That's very, very true and a very good insight. And you're absolutely right. And I also remember Tulsi Gabbard when they grilled her about meeting Hafiz al Assad. And she made this point very clearly that the alternatives are far worse. What are we even talking about? And now Ahmad al Shara has gone and proved it. Al Golani, now called Ahmad al Shara, has actually gone and proved it. So, yeah, I think there is a degree of naivete among many democratic systems. Also, I think a kind of reluctance to take hard decisions. Mackinder actually says this. I think in his book he says this, not in the essay. In his book he says this, that democracies do not think seriously about defense until they are faced with war. So this is absolutely true, and you keep pushing it away and saying, "Oh, it won't happen. It won't happen. Things have changed," but things don't change.
May I just say, partly, as a in, I mean, actually, not even in jest, to be honest, Ambassador. Of course, India belies even that. We don't take our defense seriously, even when faced with war. I mean, we
True.
must be that unique country which doesn't even take our defense
No,
very
no, I agree, and I would add to it what another thing which I frequently say. That there's a saying that a fool learns from his mistakes, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And what category are we that we don't even learn from our own mistakes?
right.
So
Right, right.
it's really quite depressing, but uh, one lives in hope.
I'm going to
And
wrap
I
up
think,
our conversation, Ambassador. Since we're on the topic of Syria, I cannot but bring this up because this seems to be one of the defining things that is unfolding. Like we were discussing, Ambassador, this would happen when this Al Shara, so to speak, takes power. I was sent two screenshots by a friend in Washington showing the CIA website side by side with
I
only
saw
a
that.
1 minute or 2 minute gap. The first one, 2 minutes ago, showed 10 million bounty on his head.
I
The
saw
second
that.
one showed this is a page error and no page can be found. I
I
mean,
saw
it is
that.
this blatant, right?
Absolutely,
It is
absolutely.
this blatant. But I want to, talk about a little bit as we wrap up this conversation, Ambassador, on something that the UAE people are saying, and also an interview given to Al Arabia news channel by Mohammed bin Salman, where actually for the first time, perhaps the custodian of the two holiest shrines of Islam, Mecca and Medina, essentially said that Islam is basically the way it is interpreted is fundamentally there are a lot of errors in it. A lot of hadiths don't need to be followed blindly. In fact, he went to the extent of saying if Wahab would have been alive today, he wouldn't have wanted a blind following of his teachings either. Now this is the fountainhead, or as it were, of Wahhabism, of Islamic conservatism, should one say. And Mohammed bin Salman is taking it dramatically to a different level.
Mm.
Side by side, the UAE people are saying that very recently also, there are more extremists today to be found in the Islamic extremists to be found in the United Kingdom and in Europe than in any part of the Middle East. These are dramatic things, Ambassador.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I think it was one of the foreign minister of the UAE. He said this when all this uh, uncontrolled, unverified immigration was taking place. He said, "We are very happy. We are getting rid of all the people who create trouble for us, and you are taking them in. We are very happy. You will face the music." So I think they realize it, and I agree with you about Mohammed bin Salman. I think he has been, I think, right from the start when he was anointed as the crown prince, he has been saying this, that we need to relook at the hadiths and see which of them are actually genuine, which of them are not. But I think at the moment the clerical establishment is not willing to countenance any such change. It's going to be hard, and luckily he has time. He's quite young. So I think once the older generation of the stand pat people pass on, there may be an opening to review and change things around. And I agree that the guys who are going to lead it are going to be from the UAE and from, funnily enough, Saudi Arabia. And the country that is going to resist most is Qatar. So let us see how it goes. And that my closing thought on that would be that now that Syria has a leader who is more amenable to the likes of Turkey and Qatar, we are already beginning to hear again talk about reviving the gas pipeline. So, will it happen this time? Because Assad had blocked it. He had blocked it on the advice of the Russians. Now he is out of power and living in Moscow. But already the Turks, and I think in some quarters the Europeans are talking about it. I think the timing went a little wrong because President Trump wants to sell his LNG to the Europeans. So if they insist, it's going to lead to quite a confrontation. Another thing to watch, because this is really the crux of the Syria issue.
I'm going to slip in, even though this was going to be your last question, I'm going to slip in one caveat question because you brought in energy and LPG. The only thing that can perhaps, in a sense, stall, I wouldn't say stop, stall radical change in the Middle East is that the winds of change. There's an interview that the Aramco chief just gave where he said, we feel once again the winds of change blowing towards our side because, the net zero movement hasn't quite been able to achieve what it set out to achieve. So you will need fossil fuels. There
Yes.
will need to be greater exploration and so on and so forth. Now, this is one of the things that has stalled real change in the Middle East. Do you think this again could at least temporarily, stop real change from happening?
Depends on what you mean by real change. I think the economic connections are changing even now. The amount of oil. The real axis of economic power and activity from 1950 till about 2000 and early 2000s was the oil connection between Europe and the West Asian countries. I think now oil, even without net zero and all that, the amount of oil that is being imported by the Europeans is sharply down, sharply down. I think at the peak, it accounted for something like 60% of their overall energy. Today, it is of the order of 10 to 15%, depending on which country we are talking about. So I think that change is continuing and it will continue. But the newer connections are coming up, which is, a lot of it is going to the People's Republic. And of course, Japan remains a major importer. So all of them are orienting towards the Indo-Pacific, including India, by the way. Because India is, I think, the largest importer of Qatar LNG. So new relationships are being formed. Those kind of changes will continue. They're inevitable. But what will it mean in social terms? I think that's going to be a different vector. As we just discussed, I think the younger generation of Arab leaders are going to play a very decisive role in times to come. You see, for example, how many of them have already come to terms with the existence of Israel. But for 7th October 2023, I believe
There
the
was talk
Saudis will
that
be.
that even Saudi Arabia might come around to signing the Abraham Accords.
That's what I'm saying. But for that, I think they were on the brink of it. And I think now with President Trump back in harness, I think it will happen on his watch. So, there is that kind of wind of change is certainly happening. What will it mean for the larger Middle Eastern area in terms of the global economy? That is the big issue to be discussed.
No doubt, as things unfold, we'll get an opportunity to discuss this in detail with you. For now, Ambassador, thanks very much. Ambassador Prabhat Shukla, one of the most astute watchers, especially of China, Russia, and what's happening to the crisis in Ukraine and around the world. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate your time as always.
Hindol, always a pleasure. And your questioning is so good, I also end up learning a lot. So
You're too kind.
many thanks, and always good to talk to you.
You're
And
too
I'll
kind.
send you
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Really appreciate your time.
and my emails are on their way to you
Okay,
tonight.
wonderful. Look forward to them, sir. Thank you very
Lovely.
much.
Okay, bye.